So I just wanted to hop on here real quick and talk a little bit about seed starting. It's November here in Ohio. So next month is actually when I will start gathering my supplies for winter sowing, which is one form of seed starting. And when I talk about seed starting, I'm talking about how you start your own seedlings for the spring month. So gardening is not just a summertime hobby, it's kind of an all year round event. So depending on your climate, you might be sowing all year round, or you may have little breaks. We don't really have to jump right into seed starting truly until February or March, depending on what you're trying to grow. But I like to start seeds almost like December to May, largely because I sow a lot. I'm a bit of a seed hoarder, and I'm also very anxious around having enough seedlings when the season starts to plant, and it's inevitable that I lose some during the process. So it's good to oversow, in my opinion, just so that you aren't left shorthanded when it comes time to actually plant your stuff out. So, and I'm also going to be doing seed starter kits for those who sign up for my garden plan program. So I will be providing heirloom vegetable seedlings to those who sign up. So if you're interested, make sure you check out my Instagram and you'll be able to sign up to receive a kit. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of methods that you can use to start your seeds. I have used several over the 10 years that I have been gardening. I started out like every Joe Schmo, going to the Lowe's in my neighborhood and buying whatever, seedlings they offered, which is quite a bit and has only grown as gardening has grown again in popularity. So I wound up spending a lot of money that way. You pay between $3 and $5 a plant at your local nursery, and that's at the big box stores. If you go to an Oakland nursery or I can't think of the other popular, more local nurseries here, you'll get a higher quality plant, but sometimes you'll pay for that. And sometimes if they have sales, you may get a good amount for maybe $1 or $2 a piece, but in the end, it is way more expensive to buy your seedlings from the big box store than to grow your own. And that's including if you're purchasing the supplies and everything, it still works out to be much less expensive. You can grow an entire garden worth of tomatoes with 1 pack of seeds versus buying 3 individual seedlings for $3 or $4 a piece. So, and no guarantee that those are going to survive depending on how green your thumb is. So I choose to sow my own seeds for the economy of it, and also for the variety of choices that you have when you are growing from seed versus when you're limited to what is held in stock at the big box stores. And they do have to limit what they can provide to people based on what they know will sell. Also, what Burpee or whatever company they contract with decides to produce in mass as well. And a lot of those are not going to be your heirloom vegetables. They're going to be kind of those hybrid plants, which I don't have anything against. I think they're great producers, especially if you can or you put things up. You want a good disease tolerant grower that's going to just produce. But if you want those super tasty, super expensive in the grocery store heirloom varieties, then you're probably going to have to grow them yourself because there's not a lot of variety out there if you're buying from major suppliers. So on to the methods. There are, like I said, multiple different ways to start seeds. One is the pre-germination method, and funny enough, I learned about this method talking to a bus driver while I was at a conference out of town. And I decided to give it a try because I have been the seed storer for my local community garden, and we were gifted hundreds of heirloom tomato plants and peppers and okra. I can't even name all of the things that we were given, and I wanted to hold on to those as long as possible, but seeds only really have a shelf life of 1 to 2 years from harvest. So some of those were labeled as old as like 2007. So I wanted to not waste my potting soil medium and make sure that these seeds were still viable. So by pre-germinating, I mean that science craft from 4th grade where you took a wet paper towel, a baggie, and a bean seed, and you watched it grow in a windowsill. That's pretty much the method. You are soaking your seeds in water, or you're just taking a wet towel, you're putting your seeds in, you're keeping them moist until you see them sprout. And then once they're sprouted, you transplant them into a pot of soil. So I like this method, again, when you're not sure about the viability of your seeds, or if you want to make sure that this pot that you're going to be putting them in is not being wasted because the seed that you're putting in there is not viable or hasn't shown any growth. It's the worst feeling in the world to sow a bunch of seeds, come back when they're supposed to have germinated, i.e. sprouted, and nothing has happened, and now 2 weeks has been wasted. So I think it's a great way to kind of have a little bit more sureness before you take the next step of putting them into the soil. Another method for seed starting would be your typical method of just putting seeds into transplant trays, putting a lid on them. Most of them come with the greenhouse method essentially, which is a plastic lid that pops on top after you water them and set them under a grow light. That is one fairly popular way of starting your own seeds, and it works. I did that for years. I even converted some old shop lights that I had into grow lights and took some plastic shelving and created a greenhouse in my basement, and germinated tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, those hot weather plants that take a long time to get started. So you want to make sure that you are sowing those ahead of time. And that was my way of starting my seeds. And it worked. Like I said, it works, but it is labor intensive. I mean, you are setting up those trays, you're planting those seeds, you're labeling them all, each row. You're making sure they stay moist, you're making sure that you fertilize them, and when it comes time to transplant them outside, they need to go through a hardening off process where you're taking them from inside and moving them outside and inside, outside and inside, so that they're strong, until they're strong enough to stand the sun and the wind and the rain outside on their own. So it can be a bit heavy labor wise. And in the grand scheme of things, it's an incredible payoff. I mean, you're getting hundreds of plants for very little money. So it works, and honestly, it's a way that's useful when you are using when you're growing plants like tomatoes or peppers and eggplants that have an incredibly long period of time that they need before they can go into the ground. Here in Ohio, Mother's Day is usually the day that people say is when you want to plant your hot weather loving plants out there, your tomatoes, your peppers, your eggplants, things that cannot handle a frost. So typically our last frost date is around that Mother's Day mark, so people tend to use that as their signal to get their plants into the ground. And tomatoes and things like that do take I think 30 to 60 days before they're really ready to harvest. So it's good to have your plants ready to go. So I do think that that method is useful for certain things that you just can't throw a seed in the ground and on May 12th and expect a harvest before November. I won't say that late, but it takes a while and it's not recommended in Ohio. So the other method of seed starting that has become my favorite is winter sowing. Winter sowing is when you take containers and you turn them into mini greenhouses. You're putting your seeds and your potting soil into the container, you're covering them, and you're sitting them outside in the winter time. And as the seasons change and things begin to heat up, they will naturally start to sprout when the warmth inside the container reaches that appropriate level for germination. So rather than you creating the environment inside your home, the container creates the environment outside. And because it is in an enclosed space, it gets warmer faster, but not so fast that it sprouts before the last frost hits. Or if, for instance, you do get a little bit of a sprout, the container itself protects them from the normal elements so that they would not get frostbitten or die. So essentially, like I said, you're creating a greenhouse for these babies, but that waters itself. So the great thing about winter sowing is that the moisture that you put in on that first, when you're planting them in the potting medium, is trapped within that greenhouse. And it just, as we learned in science class all those years ago, it creates its own little ecosystem, and it continues to keep those seedlings moist, which is incredibly important when you're starting seeds, is keeping that soil moist. If it dries out, it's a wrap pretty much. So the winter sowing method just makes all of that process so much easier. It's a bit labor intensive on the front end because you are having to create all these containers, and I can't even tell you how many I have at this point, probably in the hundreds. You're labeling them using a weatherproof marker. Please use a weatherproof marker. I learned the hard way after the sun wore off all of my labels before I got out there to plant them, and I was Googling images of what baby bok choy versus baby broccoli versus baby tomatoes look like. So highly recommend investing in an oil-based marker for that. But yeah, once your containers are made, you're good to go, and you're just planting seeds from December till probably around March or April here in Ohio, because that's you're going to want to make sure that they're out there and germinated in time to transplant by May. And if you're growing those plants that need a long germination period, then you want to get them out there so that they can catch the warmth as soon as it starts here in Ohio, and they'll be ready to go by Mother's Day. So yeah, those are the three methods that I use. I'll do some tutorials on how to actually do all those things, even though I don't use the tray or the pre-germination method myself anymore. I'm mostly a winter sower, but I'll do some tutorials just for those that are interested in starting their own and would like some help in figuring out how to do that. So thanks for hanging with me, and happy sowing.